I still like looking at the digital image of your face on my screen. It's
Yeah.
just as blurry and slightly choppy with internet lag as I want your face to be.
As all digital things are meant to be. I
Yes.
think next week I'm going to shoot to go to your place though.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. We'll get rid of the pixels and we'll be in person
Well, there'll still be pixels though, at least for people watching.
for the other people, not for us.
Yeah. I was trying to
Yeah.
think of how we'd even do that. And I think I'll have to like bring
I
my
don't know.
laptop or something. And
Yeah.
I have a nice USB-C mic now, so I can plug it in pretty much anywhere.
Yeah. That's going to be a lot of strange logistical finagling. Imagine if we can't figure it out and we just end up being on our two laptops, like opposite each other. Like, well, we couldn't figure out how to do it into one thing. So here we are back to what we normally do, just in the same room.
Yeah, I think we will have to because this is like an online service. So
Yeah.
technology. But yeah, I guess I'll go first this week.
Please do.
I'm feeling a little inspired.
Yeah.
So mine kind of has to do with, I'll do my shameless plug that I've released a couple short stories on Amazon.com.
Oh my.
And yeah. So I was kind of thinking about partially just that process and like, even just getting them ready to go, just like all like the little quirks you have to do to get things ready to publish or try to make sure, oh, I need a table of contents. Like I know what's in the book, but I should at least let other people know what's in the book. Stuff like that, or a cover or all these other things that are a lot less fun than imagining crazy scenarios and places. But for me, actually, like when I was started to get into that, I started noticing kind of a flow state. And like once I was just sitting down and working every day towards like that goal, especially like in that wrapping up process, it became something that was, became kind of rewarding and made me excited to like continue on each day. So it kind of has to do with like a little bit with the topic last week of kind of, wrapping things up and starting something new. But like I wanted to kind of at least explore that flow state a little bit more and like why that happens or, how something goes from being like tedious and a chore to all of a sudden just like kind of rewarding and fulfilling. Kind of an odd dynamic. So I think for me, I was going to start off with maybe a point and then I'll just ask you a question or maybe something that stands out to you. But the first point that kind of stood out to me was, and hopefully this isn't too cliche, but I think it'll be a good reminder anyway, is just kind of rediscovering fun in your work. That's I don't know. It's something that's so simple. Everybody says it, or a lot of people say it. It's something that's kind of, I don't know if it's intuitive, but I think when people often remember to have fun, they'll have fun for a little bit, and then all of a sudden, like that gets lost again somehow, and then they're back to the grind, and the stress kind of overtakes them again. And so for me, like I'm trying to find more ways to get back into that fun state of mind when I'm working on stuff, and just realizing like it's a privilege to be able to work on stuff and to almost not necessarily revert in maturity, but like, when you think about when you're a kid and you sit down and you play your Legos and you come up with this whole story in your head, like that's just effortless and you had a good time. Like, man, that's a win-win, It's like any creative would just like drool over that prospect, and it's like the fact that you had it at one point and now don't, or have it less, is very kind of strange, I guess, because you should be able to, it's not like it really goes away necessarily. It's either just maybe suppressed or it isn't your focus, I guess, at some point. I mean, maybe it has to do with neurochemistry and your brain solidifies and can't imagine as much, but I tend to think that's not the case.
That just made it sound so depressing. Your brain just like solidifies and can't have fun anymore. It's like, oh, that's terrible.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that's not true because otherwise the movie Hook wouldn't exist. But...
That's right. Oh, man.
So
that was good.
Counterpoint. But yeah, so I think like, even that movie is a great example of kind of that idea of getting back to that state in some way. And yeah, I've just been, since I'm in the beginning stages of starting a new story, each time I start off a story, I want to like make sure I'm going into it with good intentions and like putting my best foot forward. And so I kind of reevaluate my process. And for this, I've just been really, I'm going to rant for a little bit longer. Sorry, but
I'm here for it.
Yeah. Cause I often get in the trap of, this is writer's therapy right now.
So tell me about how writing makes you feel, Paul.
How did that book hurt you?
The pages, they cut me.
My parents smacked me with that book when I was a kid. No, they didn't do that. Often I'll get into like the idea or like a rut when I'm writing a story of thinking about, what would make a good story, and what makes a good story and what's fun and like engaging for you are like two completely different things in my mind. You almost take on this, or at least for me, I almost take on this like movie critic role sometimes for myself, and like I'll come up with a plot point, and the movie critic will be like, "Well, that's dumb because that's a plot hole," or or that won't do well because that's not popular, or people won't be able to relate with this, or it's whatever it is. It's like kind of squashing the ideas before I even get them out on the page. Whereas like trying to approach it more with the fun mindset, it's like, when I can just sit down, like there's moments where I can just sit down and be like think of an idea, or like just give myself the liberty to think of an idea that like, that's cool, that just gives you like that sense of like coolness. I don't know a better way to describe it, but yeah. And then kind of like trusting that feeling and just rolling with it, even if it doesn't like, you can disprove it 100 ways or it doesn't make sense necessarily. Just be like, if I were to like read this plot as a kid, would I like it, or as somebody who didn't have any judgment, would I like just think it's cool, outside of all judgment. So for me, that's kind of what I'm trying to start my new story with. For you, is there anything that kind of helps you maybe either get out of your head when you're writing, or like or anything that puts you in a state that produces like really good work?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that writing is a morning thing for me. It is not something I do past like the afternoon, even past like late morning, like 10 a.m. That's too late. The writing is gone. Should have done it earlier. For me, writing is like I woke up at 5:30 a.m. and I started writing by 6 o'clock at the latest, and I'm writing from like 6 to 8 or 6 to 9 or something like that, and then the writing's done. No more. Like even
like
this
in a
morning,
dream state or something.
I don't know if it's that I'm in a dream state. Enough. I feel like, I'm just a slight tangent from the writing thing to talk about mental states and mind space. I feel like in the moment I wake up, my mind is a relatively blank slate. And the further the day goes on, the more things have gotten like written down in the brain. And it gets busier in my mind. And it's harder for me to stay focused on one thing. Whereas first thing in the morning, it's really easy for me to be in a state of flow or to be really focused on something because I don't have lots of clutter in my brain. So it's really hard for me to like return back to that flow state later on in the afternoon. I have to like go exercise or go on a walk or like do a lot of really intentional stuff to try to like relax my brain and wipe the slate clean again. So yeah, for me, writing is very much a morning thing.
Do you feel like, can I ask a follow-up question on that? Do you feel like the ideas are coming to you? Like, and that's like, so you mentioned having like a more clear mind. Is it so you can like hear like ideas coming from internally, or is it more so you can like focus and like make ideas to put down? That makes sense.
I feel like the ideas are there. It's just a matter of organizing them, and not getting distracted from my ideas. So like when I'm writing something, I feel like I'm usually have an idea of what I want to write just throughout the day. Like a random idea comes to me and I kind of hold on to it in my brain, or there's all kinds of like random little notes that I'll think of where it's like, maybe not in the morning, maybe later in the day, or just maybe a morning when I'm not planning on writing something. And I'll think, oh, this is a really good idea. I should make this like little change in whatever I'm trying to write on. And I'll just write like a couple sentences of a note about something.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have time to write more than that or whatever. And so when I come back to, okay, I got like an hour to sit down and write, there's usually several like bullet point notes of like, oh yeah, here was this idea. I could write for an hour just on this one idea right here. So I'm going to pick this thing because this is interesting to me at the moment. And I'm just going to write on that for the next hour.
Nice.
So I think for me, it's like the ideas are there. I never really feel like I'm out of ideas. It's more of just like how to organize the chaos of my brain.
Yeah. And finding a time that facilitates that.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned with the notes, or like, writing down little just jots, because actually I do that too. And I think it's a fun little, almost leaving like a breadcrumb trail for yourself. You just, like, are almost teasing yourself, and you like leave like a little hint at something, and then the next morning you pick it up and like just explodes your imagination. You're like, oh, okay, I gotta like delve into this further, and then you leave something else for yourself at the end of that.
Well, okay, so that's an interesting thing to think about, and I've toyed with this idea in my own life many times when it comes to like writing down notes. We've probably talked about this before at some point, but I always think of myself as the character in Memento, where it's like I'm creating my own sort of destiny of like, I'm going to create this thought, and I'm going to forget everything that happened in the past. And then this one thought will be the one thing I know. And then suddenly this will consume me. And by creating this one thought for myself, I basically direct my future path to take an action that I've decided I'm going to take. And I think it's sort of a weird thing, because it's like in the moment, I've got an idea. I could just write down everything I have for that idea, assuming that I have time for that. But there's something about just writing kind of the gist of it and then leaving it alone that almost makes it so that when you come back to the idea, you might have more to that idea than you had before, or it might be different than when you first imagined it. You might sort of create a different scenario of that idea in your mind. And it almost allows the idea to like shift a little bit when you don't write it all down. And I feel like you kind of get a different result, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. Sometimes I'll even leave when I'm like done writing for the day. I'll end in like the middle of a sentence. Just when I come back, I'm like, I hate unfinished stuff, even though I do it a lot. But it'll just be like, it'll gnaw on me. So I just like have to start writing, because I'm like, I obviously, like, I know what the end of this sentence is. Like, why didn't I write it down? So it's like I just instantly just get out and finish that sentence, and it just like already gets me off running in a sense.
That way you get that quick sense of accomplishment right when you write, and then you feel good immediately. I finished it. Yes. Yeah.
It's like an easy win right off the bat. Like, okay, just finish the sentence. I'm good. I'm writing now. Okay. That is interesting. I've been thinking about Memento a bit lately too. It's funny that you brought it up. I always like the line, it's like, I can't remember to forget you, or something like that.
Oh yeah. He's got, I don't know. I haven't seen it in a while, but that sounds familiar. Yeah.
Something about, he's trying to forget his wife or something.
Do you think that with your flow state, how do I want to ask this question? Do you feel like you need your flow state? Like you are dependent on being in this like high energy creativity state of mind in order to make stuff? Or can you like wake up, I'm going to make stuff at 9 o'clock because I put it on my schedule, and I'm going to be creative because I decided to be. And you're like grinding through it, even though you don't feel it, you're like still making something work. Do you feel like you're able to get something productive in a non-flow state, or you just if I'm not in a flow state, then forget it. I'm not even going to do this. Like, how dependent on that are you?
Yeah, I'm pretty dependent, I would say. I think it's something that you can cultivate, though, either through like daily routine habits, mindset, meditation, setting yourself up with writing tricks. Like, I think, because to me, there's a huge difference between inspiration and work. Like, it's kind of the difference between artificial intelligence and like people. It's like one is, okay, I can't go one episode without dropping that in. Sorry, people. It's the best metaphor of our time. We're gonna have to like put a censor bar up, like
it's all around us.
Yeah,
it's watching us.
Like start censoring myself beep every time I say AI. So he's at it again. Trigger word. Because like, okay, so like, because I think so like artificial intelligence, right? You can create a painting with it, but like, where did the painting didn't come from? Like it used data that was mined from humans essentially, and like studying their paintings, right? Like it came from a higher source. It wasn't like the AI that necessarily just like it put all the pixels together in a random, configuration that like, or not even random, but like a pattern that it recognizes what humans do as art, But so I think people are the same way. Like we put together pixels in ways that imitate art a lot of times, or like true inspiration, I would say. And so like sometimes those patterns can even reflect reality or like different aspects of reality. But I don't think that everything that's done as art, it's not like transcending anything. It's not like bringing in new information. It's just rearranging pixels a lot of times. And so I do think there is states, though, of true inspiration where you're actually pulling from just beyond rearranging things or retelling things or just grinding at it, for lack of a better word. Like I think in those moments, like that's true flow. And it's hard to like, I think you really have to be aligned spiritually, mentally, physically. And so that's why it's so rare in a lot of sense. But when you do it, it's something that's not even, you're just a conduit for it. It's not even something you're doing necessarily, in my opinion. So hopefully that answers the question. It's a long way of saying that, but
yeah, man. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that when it comes to the state of flow, it's definitely nice to trigger an idea with that energetic flow state. You suddenly get the spark of, ooh, this is such a good idea. Oh my gosh, I have to write this down. I have to create something off of this idea.
Yeah.
And you get all excited and you get the energy for it. And then once that energy dies down, once your sugar rush from your Snickers bar dies down, then suddenly it's like, okay, I guess that was all the idea. I feel exhausted. It's out of me now. It's on the note paper. And then like the next time you come back to it, if you don't have that energy again, then it's like, okay, I know I need to work on this idea. And I probably need to spend another, many hours working on this one spark of inspiration I had, but I don't feel as much energy as I had in the initial energy. And so now it's like, it's a little bit of a grind. Like I know the work I have to do and it's a good idea. I like it, but it's not like exciting like it was before.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's at least how I feel sometimes.
Like a different emotion now.
Yeah.
Like access fortitude and all these other boring emotions. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Now it's just like I have to do the thing. I made the plan. Now I have to do the plan.
Do you find like reading your own work ever puts you in a flow state?
Oh yeah, I actually usually start off anytime I'm working, especially in the self-editing phase, which is where I'm at right now with my book. I always start off reading what I wrote, because even if I'm not editing and I'm writing something new, I almost always will reread a little bit of wherever I left off, because I oftentimes just forget the context. I just forget, like, what am I writing about again?
Isn't
Like,
that funny? It's like you
What was
wrote it,
happening?
but you still can't, like, oftentimes
I
can't even
know.
remember.
I wrote it, but it's like, dude, I don't know if I could quote anything in my book right now. It's like, I wrote it, but I don't like have it memorized. And I think when it comes to self-editing, it's really important to reread, because when you reread it, that's when you're like, ew, I wrote that? Yeah. I have to like change a bunch of stuff. Ew, why did I even write it that way? What was I thinking? I repeated the same concept like 5 times across several different paragraphs. Like, why did I do that? Just write it once. You know,
editing brain is the worst.
Yeah, editing brain definitely sucks. Yeah, when you're just free vomiting, it's like, yeah, I'll just write whatever. And it's like, yeah, I'm going to say the same exact thing like 7 different ways because I'm thinking of 7 different ways to say it. It's okay, I'll just clean it up later. And then when you go back and clean it up, it's like, okay, I need to take all 7 of these and put it into one way of saying it and have unity and similar themes across my whole sentence structure of what I'm doing. Why did I create 7 different things? Why did I do this to myself? Yeah.
Yeah, right. It is interesting because there's like, it's kind of like a literary idea, I guess, in that where as like you take these old historical texts, right? And they've been copied, they've been translated and all this kind of stuff. And they've been like retold by people and all this, like, you know, old fairy tales, that kind of stuff. And it is interesting how you know, these stories that we see now, hundreds of years later, were probably like a lot longer and a lot more like detailed at some point in time, you know? But over time, things get like edited, shortened, condensed, and just into their essences, essentially. And so you have these really like dense, like through almost like a cultural editing process or a societal editing process of these stories, you have these like mega condensed stories that like contain so much meaning and information, you know, because like culture has kind of edited them in a way by retelling them and like picking different parts that are important and stuff. And so you get these like supercharged stories that contain like so much meaning, which is why you see like people like Jordan Peterson or whatever talking about Pinocchio for 10 hours, you know, or whatever. Or even like stories from the Bible and stuff where it's like, you know, there's so much packed into just like a short little sentence, or, you know, could have cosmic implications, or, you know, the structure of reality is tied up, you know, in a Sermon on the Mount or something, you know. It's really interesting, but that's a little bit of a tangent. Yeah. So you like the morning for your flow state. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think morning works for my flow state. Reading off of like anytime I have a little idea or inspiration, writing that down right away, putting in like some little notes, and then just going off of those when I do end up writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I got to schedule it
stuff
and make it happen.
There's that tendency to like.
I definitely put myself through the grind.
Yeah.
What? Oh, you okay? What was it? I definitely put myself through the grind. If I get a spark of inspiration, I'm going to write that down and I'm going to follow up with that. But like when I decide Monday morning, 5:30 a.m., I'm waking up and writing. I'm writing whether I feel like it or not. It's just happening.
Yeah. So you mentioned with like the editing part of your brain or whatever, you kind of like wonder why you would write a sentence 5 times or whatever. Do you read back in like a non-editing way and become inspired at all or anything like that?
Oh yeah. Every once in a while.
Spark new ideas.
Yeah. Every once in a while I'll read through and think, you know, ooh, I really like what I talked about here. I am so good at talking about myself in this one author's biographical section right here.
This biography is the most brilliant, inspiring human I've ever read about.
This is inspiring me to write more about myself. No, I don't know. I think every once in a while I'll like say something funny, and I kind of will reread some of my little jokes that I insert, because some of my writing's pretty dry. So if there's like a little joke, it's like, aha, an oasis in the desert. And so it's sometimes sometimes I read those and it's like, yes, it's still funny. That's good. I like it. I like that thing.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's good.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Yeah. So you say you can like pretty much get up and write no matter what. You feel the flow no matter what. If you're like kind of adhering to those principles of, like, I don't know, getting up at a certain time, and like if you check the boxes, maybe physically, does the flow come for you?
Yeah, I would say the flow state is pretty predictable for me. If I wake up early, high chance I'm going to feel like a pretty high energy writing state. If I've got some bullet point ideas that like, oh yeah, this is an idea that I haven't written about yet. I was excited about that idea. Pretty easy to like keep the energy going with that. And I would say sometimes it's maybe the first like 10 minutes of writing is a little boring as I'm kind of sitting there going, okay, not totally sure what I'm trying to write with this right now. Let me try this. No, that's not exactly what I'm trying to say. Let me try this. And then maybe after I've kind of gotten a little warmed up and I kind of feel it out and sort of write a few things down and then finally figure out, oh, wait, this is actually what I'm really trying to say right here. Then it's like, okay, I'm off and running. Now it's like, okay, yeah, I just got to keep my typing to keep up with the pace of my brain here. That's usually where I get eventually.
Need some Neuralink. Yeah. Do you, so it sounds like it comes from like having stuff to write about or like things that you want to get out. Is there like, if you don't have something that you like actively want to write about, does that make it harder, I'm guessing, or like the flow state harder, or you usually always have something that you want to write about?
I feel like I pretty much always have something that I want to write about. There's a few, I'm thinking right now in my book, there's a couple little sections where I've written down most of what I wanted to say about it, but there's still, just because there's a few sciencey things that I'm writing about that it's like, I should go double check some of this stuff and read a few research papers and what's like some of the stats on this and what's the more solid kind of scientific theory I could put behind what I'm trying to claim here. And
have some quantum stoner bros if you want some ideas.
So yeah, just trying to like, sometimes I do a little bit of research just to make sure I'm saying things like correctly. Like, was that accurate to make that statement, or is that just my opinion, or is there a study I can say? So yeah, every once in a while I get a little bit bogged down in doing some research.
Well, Elon says.
Well, Elon said that you don't have to drink water every day. You can just zap yourself with electricity from the sun.
Yeah, your book's
just
about
like a car.
Your fiction book's about Mars, right?
Yeah.
Get some pointers from him.
Yeah. You can get some pointers from me. Look, when you go to Mars, this is basically how it's going to go. I'm basically writing the future of Mars in this book right here.
That's actually one of the most fascinating concepts to me is, it's a little more of a tangent, but is basically how writers create the future in some sense, or just create it in general.
Yeah.
I'm always struck with it with Star Trek is a big one, because it's like everything, or a lot of things in Star Trek, like all these engineering nerds that like grew up watching Star Trek are now trying to like build, like, oh, we'll build. And everyone's like in Star Trek over there tapping on their little, thing. And it's like, what did we build? iPads, it's like directly inspired. Or even, better yet, what made me feel that again was watching yesterday, someone built the Batman tumbler, like his big Batman Begins, like the big beefy car thing, and it's like, that was just like some guy's head that he painted out for concept art, that they like put in a movie. And now you got like people building like real, spending hundreds of thousands of dollars in real life to like build this thing that just some guy imagined at one point. Like if that's not like, you always think as like a creative, you're not necessarily directly, involved with real life, but if you're like actively inspiring someone to like spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to like form metal into something, like, you don't need any more direct proof than that, I guess.
It's kind of crazy. Yeah. If you write a fiction and then people try to recreate it, it's like, okay, I want to influence people to like make whatever this weird thing is I'm creating, like a strange contraption or a character's costume. Somebody's going to show up with that costume at a cosplay thing. It's like,
yeah, it's like wild that you can like directly influence people's like the future, you know, in a sense. It's so weird, you know. Or, I mean, I always think about like, like, you know, just different fan clubs like Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or whatever. And I mean, it takes you or the person, you know, however 1,000 hours, let's say, to write this work, and then literally through that process have like influenced people's activity, attention for millions upon millions of hours. You know, like the influence is exponential to like the amount of effort and work you put in. You know, they have in Canada, a lot of like these old churches are being converted to Harry Potter meetings every Sunday.
No way.
Where they just like go and they act out like it's like an Orthodox practice where they like, you know, act out all these rituals from this like sacred text.
No way.
You know, and it's like their sense of community and like their, you know, it's like their version of church. It's like what an Orthodox would do, you know, it's like, or like a Christian would do. They're acting out these practices. They're having community. It's like all the same stuff, just with like a different source text.
Wow.
And so, yeah.
Let us pray now to J.K. Rowling.
They all hate her, so I don't know.
Oh, they do? Really?
Yeah.
Why do they hate her?
Because it's the dumbest thing of all time. So
she did something stupid?
I guess. I don't know. It's like, so basically she wrote the books and then everyone was like, I don't know if this is diverse enough or whatever. And then, so then she like retconned a bunch of her characters. And so she's like, well, Ron was always gay or something, or like, you know, or Dumbledore was always gay, or Ron was actually black or whatever, you know?
Oh, so she just sort of like in interviews afterwards was like, yeah, by the way, whatever.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
It's like Ron's described as like red hair and freckles, but she's like, yeah, he's black. Yeah, whatever.
That's just being
like,
a people pleaser. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. And then, but then like, I don't know, that didn't satisfy people that wanted the diversity, I guess, or whatever. So then they all just like jumped down her throat for that. And then, I don't know, it's just, no one comes out looking good in that scenario, I don't think.
Okay.
But yeah, like that's fiction, you know, affecting the real world and having a lot of influence to shape behavior and culture.
Trying to write in diversity before it was cool.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, how's your week of inspiration going?
It's good, man. Yeah. Yeah, what was I inspired by this week? I was in such a flow of this conversation, I forgot about it. No. I have been thinking a lot about philosophy this week, and my wife and I actually started, philosophy. And Paul is philosophy. And my wife and I actually started listening to Jordan Peterson's Biblical Psychology series, and so we've just been talking deep philosophy these past like 2 weeks, really. Just all kinds of like the history of psychoanalysis and philosophers in the past and comparison of Jordan Peterson's ideas to different people. And it kind of made me reflect back to C.S. Lewis. And that's what I'm going to say was inspiring for me this past week, because in looking at Jordan Peterson, I kept talking about C.S. Lewis with my wife and being like, well, that reminds me of an idea that C.S. Lewis said, and C.S. Lewis has a similar thing, and la 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 la. And I was like, gosh, it's crazy how much of C.S. Lewis's books I've consumed, how many ideas he has that have really permeated like the Christian culture of today and the philosophical ideas that we have today. And I think Jordan Peterson just has a lot of crossover similarities to C.S. Lewis, so it was making me think about him a lot. But yeah, I think there's a lot to aspire to as being an author. Like for myself, writing nonfiction, that's where I'm starting at least right now, and hoping someday to get more into fiction. I think that I am really inspired by C.S. Lewis because he did both very well. And then also just how he was a teacher and I'm a teacher, and just thinking of how he has such strong, not even, I wouldn't even say his ideas were like super original in like a sense of, nobody's ever thought of those things before, but just the way he would frame things and come at different ideas from angles that like, I'd never really thought of that before. That his perspective and approach on certain topics felt very original. And I think that he made you enjoy philosophy. I think that's one of my favorite things about C.S. Lewis. A lot of people, if you're like sitting in a philosophy class, sometimes it could be interesting if you're really into it. Like if you and I sat in a philosophy class, we'd probably be interested in it. But there are a lot of topics that can get kind of boring and meticulous, and the logic can get deep, and not everybody's interested in that. But I think C.S. Lewis did a good way of creating really relevant pictures and engaging your imagination and making you think deeply into your own life about situations and scenarios that made you actually kind of enjoy philosophy. So I think I'll start off with that, and I'll ask you, how many of C.S. Lewis's books have you read? I don't know how much of his content you've consumed, and would you say there's anything of his that's like a particular favorite book of his that you've consumed?
Yeah, it's funny. I actually just literally wrote a comment on Matt's latest podcast episode, because him and his guest got into the space trilogy. And that's like pretty much top maybe one or two favorite series of all times. Yeah, I like that. That work is like just brilliant on another level. It's weird to find something like so poignant and like artful, deep. I don't know. It just crosses so many like boundaries at once. And it's very, I don't know. It's very transformative, I guess, for my imagination and just ideas on writing and stuff. And that's kind of like the guest on Matt's podcast was saying that as well. But it's basically something I aspire to every time I write. It's like I kind of like hold those books up as kind of models for what I want to be doing, for better or worse. I want to maybe hold that a little bit looser in the future, but I at least like to have them in mind when I'm kind of thinking about what kind of work I appreciate. But what was I going to say about that? Shoot. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I remember. Because you were saying that he has like C.S. Lewis has a good way of reframing things, or like, he's not necessarily original, but he like puts things in good perspective. And I feel like that's exactly what the space trilogy does. It's like, he's just retelling Adam and Eve. Like it's not, original per se, but it is telling it in like a very profound way, in some way that's like actually really visceral to me, at least, where it just kind of like puts you in that place and like makes you aware of like the bigger themes going on in that story. And just I don't know, like this was how this was made in like a very scientific, approach to it, where it becomes more about the cause and effect and like, okay, so then they made this on day 6 and this on day 7. And instead of like that kind of more mechanical mindset, kind of getting the theme of, what do the relationships look like between the characters in this evolving, created world? And, how is like the visceral sin nature, like coming in and affecting things on like on a human level, I guess. So yeah. And that's Pearl Andra I'm talking about. But, as far as like how much of his stuff I've read like, I don't know, like all the Narnia stuff. I've read Screw Tape Letters, Mere Christianity, a few of the small tracks, and the Space Trilogy. I think that's it. So, yeah.
Do you think that his works, like, what would you say is kind of the greater side of his works, his fiction or his nonfiction? What do you think he's like more, or at least that you would respect him for more? I mean, you mentioned the Space Trilogy, so maybe you would like defer to him more as like a fiction author, but it's like, what do you think he did better, the fiction or the nonfiction, you think?
Yeah, I mean, he's just obviously a brilliant person. no matter how you slice it. So like that kind of bleeds through into everything. I would say what's more profound to me is the fiction stuff, just because I don't know, maybe it's the visual nature of it. I just know like his work has kind of like left a lot of like imprints in my mind of like visual images and feelings. And so like the philosophy is cool and stuff, and that I don't know, that's never really resonated with me. Like I've never been able to just like sit down and read like Immanuel Kant or something, you know, just like go through this like tome of, actually that's, yeah, or like these tomes of, you know, philosophical ideas. Like they're cool, but it doesn't really resonate with me in or like it doesn't stick with me, so I don't see the point in really reading it. I'm sure it's shaping me subconsciously, but yeah, I think the outside of the space trilogy, The Magician's Nephew is like my favorite by him. I just, for whatever reason, that one, like the idea of the pools and like jumping into different worlds and like certain worlds are dying, and maybe I'm just obsessed with creation and end times, because that's basically all the space trilogy is as well.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty big topics. Big topics, you know.
Magician's Nephew, like they go to the dying world and then they go to the created world. So I'm sensing a theme here.
Now, I feel like most people, if you talk to people about C.S. Lewis's fiction, they know Narnia pretty well, but they don't usually know the space trilogy. I feel like you're more interested in the lesser known work of his. Was there something about that like struck you as more interesting than his Narnia, which seems to be more popular?
Yeah, I just think the space trilogy is much more heavy-handed in its themes. Like, it makes no illusion about what it is, you know.
That's like, true. Narnia can be a little bit subtle on a few points.
Yeah, and
like Aslan's pretty obvious, but a few other things can sometimes be tricky.
Yeah, and it plays out more like a story, I guess, which is fine. And there's like obviously themes of, you know, like obviously there's the resurrection in the first Narnia book, or there's, you know, the last battle in the is it just called The Last Battle?
I think it's just called The Last Battle.
Yeah. So
I think so.
Like a revelation.
That's like Revelation.
There, obviously.
Yeah. The beast and
And that's probably my second favorite one. But yeah, but you know, like Prince Caspian, it's like you could definitely pick out themes, but it's not as, you know, like heavy-handed as far as like tying to biblical kind of archetypes, I guess. I don't know. What would you say? Like, could you pick out some themes from maybe some philosophical themes or like overarching themes of Prince Caspian as an example?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with Prince Caspian, maybe not in the second. Let's see which one. Not in the Prince Caspian, but in the Voyage of the Dawn Treader. I think that there's more symbolism in there, especially when the cousin, what was his name? Was it Eustace? Eustace, yeah. The cousin gets turned into a dragon. So that's like, oh, deep symbolism there. So immediately he's like the Satan or the Chaos Dragon or something. And then you have Aslan coming and ripping the scales off. And it's like painful, but then he like becomes a human again. And it's like, oh, that's super symbolic right in the middle of his 7-book series. And it feels very powerful that it's in the middle of the series, because it feels like this is the transformation, the pinnacle point of like the Christian life. Like you're coming back to your like true sense of being like the human in God's image. And Eustace like now finally respects the lion, whereas before he kind of like made fun of the lion and like, Aslan, like stupid lion, like I don't care. And then he's like, yeah, it's even real. And then he like goes to be the dragon state and then gets out of that. And it's like, now I respect the lion. I understand Aslan, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that's a really profound symbolic moment in the stories that is, I find really sticks with me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the same question to you, do you find like the fictional stuff for the more philosophical, like letter type stuff more profound?
I mean, I think I actually really enjoy his nonfiction. I would say maybe I enjoy that a little bit more. I wouldn't say I always enjoy nonfiction. Well, I would say for the most part, I probably do enjoy a lot of nonfiction. But
It
in
has like a
terms of
nice,
like,
kindly way of putting things, and like,
well, yeah, I think that C.S. Lewis is just really good with the way he does it. I mean, like I was saying, he's very artistic about it. He makes his books really short. It's not a giant tome. It's like a very thin pamphlet almost. I mean, you called it like a tract earlier. Almost any one of his nonfiction books you could read in like a couple days if you sat down for a few hours. Like, it's not that hard to get through it. I think he has a lot of really good ideas in it, and he poses things in really good situations. And he's really good at like, here's my premise of this thing. It's as if, here's my example. And he has really good examples with it.
Yeah.
And so I think he makes it, go ahead.
Yeah. That's why it almost to me like seems like a friendly thing, you know, or like, you know, it's like, you're like, let's just listening to a buddy. In a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I feel like he's just really good. Like even within like the nonfiction and the fiction, in the nonfiction, he's really good at saying like, this is on the surface nonfiction, but I'm putting a lot of narrative and imagination into it. And then on the fiction side, it's like, this is a fiction on the outside, but I'm putting a lot of deep thinking and philosophy inside of it. He doesn't really stray too extreme into one direction or the other. He's pretty good at blending them both. I think for me, he makes philosophy very consumable. And so I like reading his philosophy. I like reading his fiction as well, but I think I really like him for his philosophy, whether it's found in fiction or in the nonfiction. And I really like how he does it in the nonfiction specifically.
Yeah. Huh. Is there a go-to nonfiction that you would recommend to everybody to start out with if they haven't been in that sphere?
Well, I mean, it's hard to not start with Mere Christianity, just because I feel like that's the pinnacle of his nonfiction. But if you wanted to read something besides that, I think one book I really enjoy that I find most people don't usually pick up is his book, Four Loves. And it's just kind of like, it's a very short book, super simple. I think I've read through it at least twice. But he just talks about the 4 different kinds of love that you can have. There's the agape love, that unconditional Christ-like love. There's the romantic love, the brotherly love. And then there's like a family love. So it's like family, friends, romance, and the way that God loves us. And he just kind of defines each one of them, talks about how you could use this in your life, what some of the Bible says about some of these types of love, the pros and cons, when it's right, when it's wrong, things like that. And I think it's really interesting because I've talked to a lot of people in Western society where when you describe love, they only understand love as a one-dimensional aspect of human life. They don't think of love as there being different types of love. They don't think of love as something that you could choose to do. Love is like this passion that you feel and it happens to you. You don't like choose to love people. I think people have like a very, very flat one-dimensional idea of love. And C.S. Lewis really like brings some texture to the idea of love, really brings it to life and makes you realize the love around you in your life, the way that people are treating you, or when you're treating people in a certain way that it's like, that was an act of love, the way that I treated that person right now. I wouldn't have thought of it that way before. So yeah. I think he really changes my perspective and a lot of people's perspective on that. And I would just say one last thing on that. If you're going to read Four Loves, I would highly recommend you get the audiobook because it's the one book that C.S. Lewis actually reads himself. It's his only audiobook that he narrates, which makes it extra interesting.
That is interesting, yeah. Huh. Did J.R.R. Tolkien ever narrate anything?
Not that I know of. Yeah.
Yeah, I think with the love, too, like a lot of times people will, like they might not have a lot of different ideas of love, but they'll kind of almost... They'll have different ideas of love, but they only come up in different contexts. So it's like, you know, when defined, they only have one definition, but like they could point to different things as being love in different moments. And so like almost the definition changes depending on their context. So they can like pick up on the different types, but they aren't necessarily cognizant of it or aware that there is like those multiple types going on at any given time. And so you'll get like different definitions when you ask somebody at a different point, you know, it's like they will be like, oh, I love my buddies, you know, and then, you know, they'll be like, they'll in this, you know, an hour later be like, I love my spouse. And it's like, you know, like they're using it and it's like they're not necessarily conscious of it, but they're using it in like different definitions, and but maybe not even aware that like it's a different type of love.
Yeah, it's a weird thing. Like I can think about back when I'd been dating my wife for a while, and we had a pretty strong established relationship, and it really felt like, man, I could marry this woman. Like I'm really interested in her. And I got to the point where I like wrote her a letter where I told her I loved her in a letter. And it's like a big momentous thing to like the first, like, I love you. And it's funny how in that context, just like you're saying, it means a lot to say that. But yeah, in other contexts, it's like, I love playing board games. It's like, it's like, well, I don't love it the same way that like when I first told my wife that I loved her, or like when God says, he loved the whole world, he gave his son. It's like not the same kind of love, but I don't, it's like, I guess I can say I like playing board games, but somehow when you say you like something, it almost sounds anticlimactic and you need more enthusiasm to describe it. I really like it. I don't know. It's like
trying to convince somebody almost.
Yeah. It's
I
hard.
really, really like it.
I don't know. I think in the English language, we've maybe lost a certain level of articulation. We could be more colorful with our own English, but even within the English language, there's a certain limitation that you maybe just don't have in certain descriptors. It can be difficult,
Yeah, well, I mean, just the way the language has been taken, it's more like a scientific language and like a very like rigid kind of language in a lot of ways to like describe things or, very adjective heavy or, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, maybe that's why we got really into music and movies.
Maybe, so that,
we're like, I don't know how to express all these things in English language. We'll just make a movie instead. And hopefully that works. Yeah. I don't know.
One thing I was going to say, man, just slipping today. Oh, because I was thinking about the space trilogy. And
space, Final Frontier, flow, symbolism, C.S. Lewis.
You're saying all my activation words. Symbolism.
I've been triggered from my sleeper state.
Yeah, no, it had something to do with basically the space trilogy and because like when I read it as a kid, it was like kind of blew my mind, but it was something had to do with like kind of the parallels in that story. I don't know. Have you read all of them?
I've only read the first two. I actually never got through Hideous Strength. I read maybe halfway through Hideous Strength, and I think I first read it when I was younger, and I just couldn't quite stick with it. I got a little bored with it. I actually did just last year reread the first book, Out of the Silent Planet, and I can't remember why I didn't pick up the next one, but maybe I just got distracted or something. But yeah, I think that it would be good for me to go through it again. I'd probably have more enjoyment going through them now. But I should ask you a question about that. Didn't C.S. Lewis write it as though he was the main character?
I'm not sure on the backstory on that, to be honest.
I thought it was slightly biographical, like he was portraying the main character almost as being himself. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I
can see that. The main guy was pretty bland, I guess. Like, I mean, he just gets like kidnapped and he's like just drug along and it's like not really.
He's kind of an observer of what's happening around him.
Yeah.
Not really like a initiator of certain things.
Yeah, like everything that happens to him just kind of like pushes him along, which I like that kind of storytelling because it just like, how else would you get eyes on these like events and situations, unless you're just being, because if like the main character is acting upon their environment, then they're like actively changing, like they're almost interfering with how things would go normally. So it's like if you thought about maybe a story set in early Americas, like with the Incas or something, and the Spanish come along, and it's told through their perspective. It's like it's going to be a wildly different story told from the Spanish perspective coming to the Americas, because they're going to be like, all these savages were like walking around and So we gave them clothes, and we, burned down their temples so they couldn't do their thing. And, we made sure everyone believed the right thing, and like, they just change everything, Whereas if you have this like, prisoner character or whatever, it's like, it's great because he doesn't have any power. He doesn't get to like change any of the culture, anything like that. And you get to kind of see like the pure culture almost, which is actually why like in my first story, I did, like this guy's just a traveler, like he's just kind of an explorer. He doesn't like want to change anything. He doesn't want to like mess with anything. He just kind of goes along and wants to experience things. So, I do remember what I was going to say though about the, space trilogy essentially, because we had been talking about graphic novels a little bit before the podcast, and like I was kind of going over my inability to remember a lot of them, and just like I don't know. And then that got like the other day that led me to, because I was thinking a lot about like things I could remember from my childhood, and I was trying to remember like creative stuff, and I was trying to remember why I could remember certain things versus others. And so I was like, was it like, because certain things just always stood out more to me, and I'm like, I was trying to find a pattern in that. Like, was it visual things that really like resonated with me? Was it auditory things? Was it like written down things? Like, why can't I remember, some comic books I had as a kid, but I can remember, every Calvin and Hobbes strip that I ever read, I could like literally quote everyone back. Was it repetition? Was it the medium? And that kind of thing. For me though, like I don't remember a lot of like comic type stuff. I remember a lot of video games. I remember a lot of specific books as well, but not like I don't remember like any of the Hardy Boys I read. There's like 52 Hardy Boys. I read like every single one. I don't even think I could tell you like one plot from one of them, but like I read the space trilogy about that around that same time, and I could like there's vivid moments that stand out to me. So I'm wondering if it's like, is it the philosophy, is it just written word? But the majority of my stuff was like, I remember was from books or movies. I don't know. So I'm curious for you, like looking back, this is a little bit of a tangent, but do you like remember, is there like one medium or one type of thing that stands out to you as like having a large impact?
Well, yeah, I mean, if I were to just categorize certain things, there's like the audiobook medium, movies.
Yeah. I guess like if you had to recite something back or have like the most clear memory about something, like what kind of stuff was it that you could just like almost repeat verbatim or like is burned, etched into your mind?
I think I would actually say I don't know if you ever consumed these, but the Adventures in Odyssey by Focus on the Family. And maybe that's just because I listened to them over and over and over again as a kid. But I think I listened to those pretty regularly up until somewhere in high school. Somewhere in high school, I stopped listening to them. I don't know when exactly. And those were hugely influential for me. And I feel like even today, I can remember a lot of the plot points, the characters, the way that they introed the show. There was just a lot of stuff that I can like flash back and remember about those radio dramas. And I think that that's one of the things that made me very much enjoy audiobooks and an auditory learner in a lot of ways, because I used to listen to those a lot. And so it was easy for me to just sit there and listen and consume it and then play with my Legos or whatever.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah,
that was a big tangent from C.S. Lewis, but I just had to know. I'm always curious, like, there's obviously like different things have to stand out to different people in certain ways, but I did, and you've read all the Narnia, right?
Yeah, I've read all of the Narnia. I've read, most of the Space Trilogy, just not all of the Hideous Strength. And I would say I've read almost all of his nonfiction. I'm trying to think if there's one that I haven't read. Maybe I haven't read A Grief Observed, and I don't think I've read Surprised by Joy. But I think I've pretty much read all the other ones that I can think of.
So when you're like consuming that kind of philosophy, what Like, what are you getting out of it, I guess, in a basic sense?
I mean, I think it just gives me a new framework to view my own life. One of the things that he said that has been really sticking with me recently, and I can't remember exactly in which work he wrote this down, but it's his concept of chronological snobbery. And I've been thinking about this concept a lot, especially because I've been really reading through the book of Genesis and trying to understand the perspective of the people of the Old Testament and in the Bible. And his idea of chronological snobbery, for anybody listening who is not familiar with that concept, it's the idea that we who are in the future can basically look at things previously in history, and we have perfect 2020 vision. So we can look back at like the 12 disciples and see how when Jesus was crucified, they all abandoned him and they all like ran away. And Peter, lied about it and denied Jesus 3 times. And we can look back from the comfort of, the future and look back onto history, and we know the full story, and we know that like Jesus was really Lord and he rises from the dead and all these things happen. And so we can look back on and be like, oh, silly Peter, why would you do that? If I was in Peter's shoes, I would never have done something like that. And that's what C.S. Lewis calls chronological snobbery. You're not fully understanding the situation that the character was in at that time of history. You don't have their perspective. You're not putting yourself in their shoes. You're putting yourself in your shoes and saying, the armchair critic, I could have done that better. When realistically, if you were them, you would have probably just done the same thing that they did, And when I go back and look at like the book of Genesis, I think from my modern perspective and my own upbringing, I have oftentimes looked at the book of Genesis as a historical book, even a scientific book. This is the science of how the world was made. And this is, the founding of the Christian faith. It's the history of things. And now I'm kind of relearning it through symbolism. And I'm like, oh, there's a lot of like deep meaning to these stories. And these stories get like reflected in similar patterns later on throughout the Bible. And you look at the New Testament and they reference a lot of the symbolism of the book of Genesis, like over and over again. And so now I'm kind of taking on this new perspective of like, when the people, Moses, assumably, wrote the book of Genesis and the whole Torah, the first 5 books. And so it's like when Moses wrote this, what was his perspective on this?
Maybe less concerned with the scientific method and more about conveying some deep truth.
Yeah, like was he writing it down thinking about like, I need to write the literary verbatim scientific details of how the world was made so the future generations will understand that. Like that's an important topic in today's culture, but back then, I don't know if that was really that important. Like I think people were more interested in like, what's the deeper meaning of the origin of the universe, not what's the scientific details. Yeah. And so for me to look back on it and have that chronological snobbery, that's where I could view it from my modern perspective as opposed to what was the author's true intent. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's a concept that C.S. Lewis was really big on in some of his philosophy and nonfiction.
Well, he's ahead of his time, man.
Yeah. He had futuristic, not snobbery. I don't know. And
that stuff's like, I feel like just getting fleshed out today in the mainstream or like Orthodox and Christian circles. The idea of, maybe the scientific method isn't the standard for truth or like, like the lens to try to view, or it isn't the lens of highest truth, I guess, if that makes sense. There's deeper things than just, is something scientifically true, or, like the meaning and like the spirit behind something is really the guiding principle, I guess. And reflects deeper patterns of reality, which we aren't even, or can't even be aware of with the scientific method, which is why I think like, especially back in like the maybe more early 2000s, like the heavy Dawkins atheistic age, it was like, well, can you prove God's there with a telescope? It's like, nope. Well, okay then. Like he probably doesn't exist. Like,
Yeah.
it's a little reductionist, but okay.
It's kind of a simplistic way of viewing it. Like,
Yeah, and then, you had like the whole, Answers in Genesis response to that, or, the creationists, where it's like, well, we have to prove, that there's this fossil record in this thing, or else, our whole faith is over,
mm-hmm.
It's like, it's kind of like a scientific response to a scientific attack in a sense.
Yeah.
So, and then I think people are finally just over that and being like, okay, like there's obviously something deeper going on that's way beyond any scientific method or like, explanation. Maybe science can peek at parts of it, but there's something much deeper and profound going on here,
mm.
which I'm happy for, and I think it's cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know C.S. Lewis was on that. That's cool.
Yeah, C.S. Lewis developed the idea of chronological snobbery. He kind of like coined that phrase, I think. And he also was really into the idea of Christian hedonism, which I think John Piper
He's got the
really
best terms.
into. I know, right? But he was really into the idea of desire, the idea that Christians, when we fell in the Garden of Eden, it was when Eve looked at the fruit and was like, it looks good to eat, and she desired it and she took it. And we're basically desiring and taking lesser things. She desired this fruit when in the garden she had God and like eternal life and joy ahead of her. And so she sort of desired this lesser thing and took like the lesser of the two good things, Mm-hmm. And he uses that famous imagery. It's like a boy who's making, like mud houses in a slum when he could have had a holiday at the beach, at the sea all day. It's like, if you have the option, people basically desire the lesser thing and are like too contented with things when really you could have eternal joy in God. We just don't really like have enough desire and like ambition to like want the truly good things in our life. And
do you
so
think that's an issue of perspective, or is it just desire?
I think it probably is perspective, but he kind of, he took it from the perspective of desire, that like, if we truly wanted the good thing, we would go for that. And so, I don't know, he kind of encouraged the hedonism, it's like, if you like do what's truly best for yourself, and what's truly best for you is to follow Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. He just had a bunch of interesting concepts like that.
Sounds like the smart guy.
Yeah. Sounds like a philosophical person. So that's the guy who inspired me for this past week.
It's cool, man.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah, it's definitely nice to go on a deep dive of like these things.
Mm-hmm.
I even wrote in that comment today. I was like, I wish we had gone on more of a deep dive on the space trilogy, and then here we are. Talking about it later on. So
yeah,
some weird manifestation there.
The AI knew. There are no coincidences with AI.
I'm probably going to get an ad for some C.S. Lewis book on my Google feed later. Later today. They can't promote good things.
Well, people listening, I hope that you get lots of C.S. Lewis advertisements in your random Google searches.
Namaste.
And I hope you enjoy good flow states, maybe in the morning, or I don't know, whatever floats your flow.
There you go. Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, take it easy, buddy.
All right, bye.